Reaction to The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett could not be a whole lot more different in my opinion, where The Mandalorian was embraced by a lot of Star Wars fans and through the power of Baby Yoda achieved what I would call widespread notice. Halo has been pretty divisive among hardcore fans and has definitely failed to make the same pop culture splash, and it's probably a bit unfair for Halo to be compared to The Mandalorian, but there are certainly some similarities. These are both highly expensive original series, which are a part of a larger sci-fi universe. The Halo show, of course, is not technically a part of the main canon, but certainly still connected. And of course, there's the idea of a, well, at least in The Mandalorian's case, somewhat faceless figure, and his relationship to someone who is, well, a little bit more innocent. The Mandalorian is also one of the most popular science fiction shows on television or streaming, so I'm sure it was something Halo looked at for inspiration. But in my opinion, they kind of missed what makes The Mandalorian good and why that show has been so successful. Here are a few lessons that Halo should have learned from The Mandalorian, but didn't. Today's video is brought to you by Audible. I love doing Audible sponsorships because I use the app almost every single day. You probably know the deal. As an Audible member, you can choose one title a month from their entire catalog, which you keep regardless of your Audible membership status. As an Audible member, you also get unlimited access to select audiobooks, Audible originals, and podcasts. And new members can try Audible for 30 days. I personally use Audible mostly for audiobooks. I've got a podcast, Tapcaf Transmissions, which is a Star Wars book club, and where possible, I listen rather than read the books because it's just a lot easier with my busy schedule. If you're looking for a recommendation, I would suggest pretty much any unabridged Star Wars audiobook which suits your taste, but specifically Heir to the Empire is always a great place to start. If you're looking for a break from Star Wars, consider trying the Area X trilogy, which is some of my favorite sci-fi. You can try Audible for free by visiting audible.com/EckhartsLadder or by texting EckhartsLadder to 500-500. Both included down in the description. Thanks to Audible. Now on with the video. Alright, so number 1. Don't blow your character reveals and spend time establishing characters. This has been one of my biggest problems with the Halo TV show. I've said before that it feels like they're trying to speed run all sort of emotional or character development, and that just doesn't work. Let's talk about the Mandalorian taking his helmet off. And no, I'm not going to make this comparison to talk about Chief's face. Just follow me here. The Mandalorian, of course, takes his helmet off on several occasions, and on each one of those occasions, we know it's a very special and important moment because the show was very patient early on. Although they could have, in episode 3 or 4, made a big splash by having the Mandalorian take his helmet off, they showed restraint. And by showing this restraint, they established the importance of the Mandalorian's philosophy. So eventually, when he does take his helmet off, it's an important moment, not only because we get to see the Mandalorian's face, but also because it's a clear bit of character development. This is something the Halo show has been unwilling to commit to. It tells us that Spartans are these incredible super soldiers, that they follow orders no matter what happens, but we never see that. Within episode 1, the cracks are showing in Master Chief's conditioning, and we never see these supposed legendary Spartans, certainly never have if you're a show watcher only, and it makes Master Chief's subsequent actions a lot less interesting and a lot less noteworthy. You have to actually build up a character before you start trying to take them down. With the Mandalorian, we knew why his helmet rule was so important to him, so taking the helmet off and that character development is well earned and paid off after a full season basically. With the Master Chief, they couldn't even wait a single episode before diverging from what the norm is supposed to be, and that's just not very interesting. And I think you can also extend this to the UNSC as well. The UNSC being some evil organization isn't nearly as interesting in my opinion as the UNSC facing an existential threat and us slowly learning that they're not the good guys. You got to put the work in if you want the reveals to be meaningful. I guess that's how I'd sum up that first point. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is world building. And in this regard, The Mandalorian and Halo are very, very different shows. The Mandalorian, especially season 1, is largely a character drama. It's focused on the travels of the Mandalorian. Pretty much every scene is shown from his perspective. It's a very personal journey. Halo, on the other hand, is supposed to be this big, almost space opera, yet The Mandalorian is easily the better of the two when it comes to world building and establishing a universe. that's really bad because, as mentioned, Halo is supposed to be a show beyond the scope of just the main character, and it's also the first real foray in a television sense into this universe. So it really needed to do good world building and get everything established, the whole setting for the story. In my opinion, the issue is noise, not audio noise, but how busy the show is. The Mandalorian is a pretty simple show, and I think that's a good way to start season 1. Now, given the fact that Halo is more of a complex story, at least it seems to be, with more main characters and everything else, but the Mandalorian is also at a disadvantage in that the state of the universe isn't really super important to the Mandalorian's story, and given his role, it's hard to really get information to the viewer. What the Mandalorian does, however, that the Halo show fails to do is take its time, not get too messy, not throw too many irrelevant plots to the viewer, whereas Halo so far has done the opposite. Pretty much any time there are two characters, the Halo TV show will go out of its way to invent some sort of dispute between them. We saw this in the most recent episode. Cracks keep forming among basically every team member that exists, and honestly, stop to think about a relationship between two characters in the Halo TV show, there will most likely be at least a somewhat adversarial nature to their relationship. And that ends up taking up a lot of time in the Halo TV show. It ends up making things very, very busy. We've had so much focus on whether Halsey is right, whether the other UNSC brass is right. That's what the conversations end up devolving into almost all of the time. And it means that we're not learning very much about the war. We're not learning about what the Covenant is doing, what the state of the UNSC is, what the war actually is. Like, I don't know whether this is supposed to be a full Covenant invasion like it was in the games and books, or whether this is something different, because they haven't taken the time to slow down occasionally, to cut out some of the noise and let us into what the world is. The Mandalorian gives us lots of little moments like that, whether it's Mando talking about how bounties have changed now that the New Republic is in force, whether it's the Armorer telling him the story of the Mandalorians, or just the fact that the Mandalorian will often give the show a chance to breathe. It will have Mando walking down these exotic streets, and it will let us soak up the planet. Halo needs to stop, and it needs to do that. It's a science fiction show. This is supposed to be, above all else, an interesting universe. Let us experience that. This ties into my next point. If we are going to have a heavy drama-focused show like this, I do think there does need to be one key relationship that the viewer can root for. In The Mandalorian, that one is obvious. The Mandalorian and Baby Yoda. The Mandalorian really doesn't have too many interpersonal conflicts or little drama with people who aren't his enemies, at least maybe beyond their introduction. There are a few obvious candidates when it comes to the Halo show. Quan and Master Chief could have been one. I don't find their relationship nearly as interesting now that we're past the first episode. I do think, however, Cortana and Master Chief is a relationship that a lot of us wanted to see, and which could still end up being fairly interesting. I also did begin to like what we saw between Miranda and the Spartan in episode 4, but again, these things need time, and it's really hard to focus on these moments when characters are being split up, when they're always fighting with each other. There really does need to be a common goal that people can come together against, and think about how the Mandalorian was endeared to Baby Yoda and vice versa. It was those moments in the first few episodes where they're saving each other against a common threat. That's how Master Chief and Cortana came together in the Halo games, and that's something we really need to see in the show. The final thing, and again, sort of related to this, The Mandalorian was really good about character development episodes, and people did complain about them at the beginning. Sometimes people called them filler. I personally disagree. However, there have been a lot more complaints about the Halo show, and in my opinion, that's because it's failed to put action and interesting moments in these filler or character development episodes. There weren't too many episodes of The Mandalorian where Mando wasn't shooting at least one person. Maybe that gets tiring, maybe that gets formulaic, but I think Halo has gone too far the other way. Keep action in your character development episodes, keep the characters busy and fighting an enemy. Otherwise, in my opinion, the show starts to feel a bit too much like a soap opera, but in space, which is fine, I think, for some genres and some shows, but Halo is supposed to be a military sci-fi, and we're not getting that right now. Those are my opinions, and those are the lessons that I think Halo should have learned from The Mandalorian. Am I in the money? Am I off? Let me know what you think down below. Until next time, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.